Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, well, so in today's episode, I thought I'd try to say something about freedom. So, freedom is obviously a very powerful and tremendously important word. But what exactly do we mean by it? Well, I don't intend to be in any way exhaustive here, but I think that any discussion of freedom has to at least start with an important distinction between types of freedom. And you might argue that there are essentially two broad types. There's what's often called negative freedom, and then there's what's called positive freedom. Okay, so let's start with negative freedom first. So negative freedom, as the political philosopher Isaiah Berlin says, is freedom from chains and from imprisonment and from enslavement by other people. So to seek freedom in this sense is to try to stop enslavement by others whose ends are theirs and not our own. So in one way then you can say that negative freedom is freedom from. It's the absence of interference or coercion by others on our lives. Something actually that John Stuart Mill makes a powerful case for in his classic work on liberty. Okay, but there's another kind of freedom too. There's what's called positive freedom. Now, positive freedom is not freedom from, but it's freedom to. It's the freedom to pursue ends or goals that are our own. It's to achieve what it is that we want. It's to be one's own master. It's to control one's own destiny. It's the power to do as we really wish. So connected to positive freedom is therefore a real sense of autonomy and of self-rule, of ownership over our life and the projects in it. Okay, but notice something about this. So notice that you can have negative freedom. That's to say you can be free to the extent that other people don't restrict what you do, but at the same time, you can totally lack any sense of freedom to do, any sense of your destiny or goal in life. And actually, you know who reminds me of this? Someone I've talked about before, Dostoevsky's Underground Man. You know, the main character from the incredible novella Notes from the Underground. Now, in that story, the Underground Man has clearly secured his negative freedom. I mean, he's completely isolated himself. He lives alone and essentially inside a hole in the wall. He's made sure that he's totally free from society and all of its dictates. But the problem is he's inside a hole in the wall. He's free from, but he's not free to do. He destroys, but he doesn't create. This is why in all of his rambling, it's hard not to detect a personal desperation there, a longing for connection and creation and meaning. Actually, this reminds me a bit of what the great psychologist Erich Fromm said. He said that freedom is very difficult to face and to live out. And that's because it requires that we take responsibility. It means that we don't try to escape the complications of life and give up being a member of our very complex societies. In other words, freedom isn't just freedom from the constraints and the demands of the social world. No, full and genuine freedom is freedom to do something. It's to move forward. It's doing what you consider to be good and right in the world. It's to try to realize your larger vision. Actually, the Underground Man's situation reminds me of another character in literature. One that's a little bit less known, but nevertheless one who also struggles with this idea of positive freedom. Now I'm thinking here of the central character from André Gide's great novel, The Immoralist. His name is Michel. So if you don't know, Michel is a young, repressed, married academic from France who ends up in Tunisia, where he discovers a new freedom to just follow all of his desires and let go of everything that he left behind. But the problem with him is that at the end of the day, despite all of his alleged freedom, he just doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't have a purpose. Although he's liberated himself, he's failed to find any reason to live. I mean, he says it himself. He says, maybe I have liberated myself, but so what? I find this empty liberty painful to bear. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, clearly freedom as self-indulgence leaves one empty. Actually, there is no freedom without some kind of limitation or measure. A lawless freedom, complete license to do what you want, is really no freedom at all. Real freedom is to be able to say no. It's to liberate oneself from those desires that have no internal limit or direction. Similarly, there's no freedom without a direction in life, without a destiny. Freedom is to get up in the morning with a goal, not with an infinite amount of choices, which, let's face it, is empty and so nothing but debilitating. As the psychologist Rollo May says, we should want only one thing and want it constantly. Then we'll be sure of getting it. But if we desire everything, we'll end up with nothing at all. Well, something like this is part of the problem with Michel. In Africa, he wakes up every morning with no work and no responsibilities and no expectations on him. In this open landscape, there are no restrictions on his desires, and they're without direction and without any aim. So all of this works against him. It makes his freedom very difficult to bear. And I think that there's one last thing going on here that explains Michel's despair, and that's this. There's little meaning in freedom conceived of in a vacuum, devoid of all other people. And that's because it's precisely in our interactions with others, in our concern and obligations to people, that value and purpose is created. There just is no meaningful freedom in isolation. In fact, the path of isolation just often leads to self-destruction. Actually, I mentioned something a bit earlier that I think might need some emphasizing. I said that freedom without measure and without a restriction on desire is no freedom at all. Now, that's important. And actually, it's maybe the Greek philosopher Plato who's the best spokesman for it. You see, for him, what genuine freedom is when what he calls the rational or the reasoning part of our soul is in control over the desiring part. In other words, when the part of us that's responsible for good judgment rules over the unruly parts of us, then we're truly free and autonomous, making decisions that are in the best interests of our life as a whole. On the other hand, when our desires have taken control over the whole of our soul, then we're enslaved, being compelled to act in ways we do not choose, leaving us feeling regretful and lost. A little bit like a leaf being blown around by the wind. Bye for now.